This module is about how to draft skill checks to match your objectives. What's a skill check? Come on now, you know perfectly well what a skill check is. You've been working with them ever since you arrived at the workshop. They are ways to find out whether an objective has been accomplished. Not a way to find out whether people have learned little bits of knowledge or sub-skills, but ways of finding out whether a given objective has been accomplished in its entirety. Now, why are skill checks important? Well, they're important for a number of reasons. For one thing, if it's worth teaching, it's worth finding out whether you have accomplished. You know that there's a difference between teaching and learning. Teaching is what the instructors do. It's the process that instructors engage in order to get students to learn. But the learning is done by the students. And just because teaching happens doesn't necessarily mean that learning happens. So you really want to find out whether the learning was accomplished. So the skill check helps you find out whether the instruction worked. Also, the skill check will help to improve self-efficacy. During the learning, when a student finds out that he or she has actually accomplished an objective, it feels good. And it improves the student's judgment of his or her ability to perform that particular skill. Thirdly, the skill check helps you to make remedial decisions. If the skill checks occur during the instruction, you will have time to make fixes when you discover that more practice is needed, or more explanation is needed, or more modeling is needed. All right? Now, how do we draft skill checks? Now, you've noticed that skill checks are different in form than objectives. So the first thing we recommend is always draft your skill check on a separate piece of paper. That is, on a piece of paper on which the objective is not written. That will help to keep you out of the trap of starting your skill check items with given or some other objective language form. So use a separate piece of paper. But the message here is that the skill check item should always match the objective in performance and conditions. Why is that? Well, if you want to find out whether somebody can sing a song, what you do is you ask that person to sing a song. You don't ask them to write an essay on the history of music. If you want to find out whether somebody can ride a bicycle, you ask them to ride a bicycle. You don't ask them to write an essay on bicycle wheels, nor do you ask them to name the parts of a bicycle. If you want to find out whether they can ride, if that's what the objective calls for, you ask them to ride. And so that would match the objective in performance. Now, by the way, you never want to degrade the performance. If you have to approximate something, approximate the conditions. Sure, sometimes you have to simulate the conditions. If you were learning how to repair malfunctioning atomic bombs, we wouldn't give you a real bomb. We would make you repair. In other words, we would make you do whatever the objective calls for, but we might give you a wooden bomb or a plastic bomb to do the performance on. All right, let me show you a couple of examples. I want to show you an overt example and a covert example. In other words, an example where the performance stated is overt or visible and or audible. And then I'll show you one that's covert where the performance and the objective is occurring primarily up here. Here we go. Here's the objective. Given an exposed roll of film, a dark room with all necessary chemicals and equipment, be able to develop the film. Question number 1. What's the performance stated in the objective? What it says is, develop the film. That's what it wants you to be able to do. So circle the performance in the objective so that it doesn't get away from you. If there's nothing to circle, you're not looking at an objective. It's time to go back and do something in the way of a goal analysis to find out what is intended as the significant outcome. All right, so now that you've got the performance identified, now identify the conditions. Well, I've got an exposed roll of film, a dark room, chemicals, and equipment. That's what the student is going to be given when the performance is going to be tested. So the test item then would look like this. It would say, here is an exposed roll of film, go over to that dark room and develop the film. And I can hear you saying, wait a minute, we can't do that. We don't have the time to do that. We don't have the necessary equipment with which to do that. Well, whenever you find yourself whining like that, ask yourself how important it is to find out whether the objective has been accomplished. Ask yourself, what is the consequence of an error? Here is the consequence of an error continuum. Down here on the low end, where there is no consequence of an error, nothing happens if the student doesn't learn the objective. Down near this end, you might lose some time, you might lose some money. As we go up to the more serious end, you might lose a lot of expensive materials, then you might lose some customers, one or more jobs might be at risk, there might be an increase in accidents, and over here at this end is the potential loss of multiple lives, such as in an airplane crash or in a submarine crash. So if it's important, according to the consequence of an error continuum, that people actually be able to perform on the job, then go all out to find out whether people can perform the way they're supposed to perform. Okay, now let's try an objective with a covert performance stated. This says, when faced with a threat situation, be able to decide correctly within 1 second whether the use of deadly force is justified. Now, what's the performance stated in this objective? Decide. That's what it says. Now draw a circle around that, because in this particular case, it might be easy to conclude that this objective is about shooting or not shooting. And that's not true at all. This objective is not about the actions you take in response to a threat. It's about deciding whether the threat warrants an action. Now, what are the conditions? Well, here's a threat situation, and that's all there is in the way of a significant condition for that objective. So how would you test this objective? We know, for one thing, that the student has to be faced with some kind of threat situation. Now here we're going to simulate that. We're not going to provide a genuine threat. We're going to simulate probably somebody showing up with an empty gun or pretending to be a bad guy. What's the performance? The performance is decide. So the test item is going to ask the student to make a decision. Probably the best way to do this is to provide a videotaped vignette depicting a threat situation and then asking the student to say something or do something simple that would tell you what kind of deciding went on up here in the head. You might say, okay, I'll show you this vignette, and then you say shoot, no shoot. You say yes, no, or whatever might be the easiest way to indicate what decision was actually made. And that's how you would test that kind of an item. Now, how many items should you use? How many items would it take to convince you that the objective has been accomplished, that the student can actually perform as the objective says. Keep in mind that no matter how many items you use, they should all match the objective in performance and conditions. You don't want to use different forms of test items just to add variety to the test or just to keep the test, quote, interesting. That's bad pedagogy. You want to find out whether something is 12 inches long, use a ruler. No matter how many times you measure it, you're going to use a ruler. You're not going to use a ruler today and a bathroom scale tomorrow because that's more interesting to do. Now, how many items also, you might ask, would it take to sample the range of conditions described in the objective? If there is a range of conditions described, then it's likely to take more than one item before you can tell whether somebody can in fact perform the objective the way you expect it to be performed. Much of the time a single item will do. When you need more than one item, it is usually because there is a range of conditions to sample and or because the consequence of an error is high. What I would suggest that you do is get the skill checks that you've completed and lay them down beside the objective of the module. That will give you an opportunity to compare the formats so that you can see for yourself that the format of an objective is different from that of a test item, and you can remind yourself of the variety of forms that are used in a skill check item. All right, now it's your turn to go and draft some skill check items for your objectives.